The fine July rain fell over Portland, Oregon, as Roger Thompson parked his Harley-Davidson in front of the doctor's office. It was the 15th appointment that year, and he had no hope left. His tattooed arms trembled slightly as he held the small hand of Marina, his 8-year-old daughter. The girl looked up at her father with her immense brown eyes, trying to read his lips as she had learned to do for as long as she could remember. Roger was an imposing figure. 6 feet 3 inches tall, with broad shoulders and a thick beard that hid some of the scars from youthful motorcycle accidents. He commanded respect wherever he went. As president of the Asphalt Eagles, one of Oregon's most traditional motorcycle clubs, he was accustomed to solving problems with firmness and determination. But Marina's condition was an enemy against which his physical strength was worthless. 6 years, 6 long years, since he first noticed something was wrong with his daughter's hearing. Marina was only 2 years old when Roger realized she didn't react when he called her from behind. At first, he thought it was just childish distraction, but when the girl started to lag in speech, while other children her age were already forming complete sentences, despair began to settle in his chest like a lead weight. The waiting room was empty on that rainy afternoon. Roger sat in one of the blue plastic chairs, holding Marina on his lap. The girl played with the zipper of her father's leather vest, that black vest with the Eagles emblem embroidered on the back, a symbol of his position and his chosen family. The leather was worn by time and thousands of miles ridden, but Roger would never consider replacing it. It was part of who he was. Marina touched her right ear, as she did dozens of times a day. It was a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. She would scratch, lightly pull her earlobe, press the entrance of the ear canal with her index finger. Roger had mentioned this to at least 10 different specialists, but all had dismissed it as an infantile nervous tic, unrelated to her hearing loss. The nurse opened the door and motioned for them to enter. Dr. Henry Sampson was the 15th otolaryngologist Roger had consulted. He had been referred by a club acquaintance who swore Sampson was the best in the Pacific Northwest. Roger no longer believed in medical superlatives, but he had still spent his last savings on that private consultation. Dr. Sampson was a middle-aged man with perfectly combed gray hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and an immaculately white lab coat. He greeted Roger with a professional handshake and smiled at Marina, who did not react to the sound of his voice, but returned the smile upon seeing his kind face. For 40 minutes, the doctor performed all the examinations Roger already knew by heart. The otoscope was inserted into Marina's ears. She remained quiet, accustomed to the procedure. Dr. Sampson frowned, adjusted the light, looked again. He made notes on his clipboard. He asked Marina to wear headphones and press a button when she heard a sound. The girl didn't press the button once. Finally, after reviewing all the previous exams Roger had brought in a worn folder, MRIs, CT scans, audiograms, auditory evoked potentials, Dr. Sampson sighed deeply and clasped his hands on the table. The diagnosis was the same Roger had heard countless times, with minor variations in medical vocabulary that ultimately meant the same thing: nothing. There was no structural malformation. The auditory nerve appeared intact. The inner ear structures seemed normal. It was an atypical case, inexplicable by the available tests. The doctor suggested more tests, perhaps a new MRI with contrast, perhaps a consultation with a geneticist in New York City. Roger listened in silence, his jaw clenched. When the doctor finished, he just shook his head negatively. There was no more money for more tests. His bank account was empty. He had sold his spare motorcycle, had borrowed from club friends, had even considered selling his main Harley, though that would be like tearing a piece of his soul. They left the office under the rain, which was now falling more intensely. Roger put Marina in the car he had borrowed from Tony, the club's vice president. His motorcycle was at home. He wouldn't risk taking his daughter on it on rainy days. He drove in silence through the wet streets of Portland, the traffic lights reflecting on the foggy windshield. Marina looked out the window, watching people rushing under umbrellas. She didn't fully understand her own condition. For her, the world had always been like this, silent, a succession of images without a soundtrack. She had learned to read people's lips with impressive skill. When she wanted to feel her father's voice, she would press her ear against his broad chest and feel the vibrations of his words. It was the closest she got to hearing. That night, at the Asphalt Eagles clubhouse, an old brick building on the outskirts of Portland, Roger sat alone at the makeshift bar while Marina slept in one of the back rooms. The other club members were there: Tony, Claude, Big Mike, Adam, and a dozen more men who formed his brotherhood. They knew from Roger's gaze that another appointment had ended, without answers. They respected his silence initially, just drinking beer and playing pool on the worn tables. But Tony, who had known Roger since they were 16, when both were just rebellious boys looking for belonging, approached and placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Roger vented for the first time in months. He spoke of the frustration, the helplessness, of how devastating it was to see his daughter living in a world without sounds and being unable to do anything. He spoke of the money that had run out, of the doors that had closed, of the feeling of failing as a father. His voice, usually firm and authoritative, trembled several times. The men around him were not given to emotional displays. They were bikers, men of the road, many with difficult pasts and scars, both physical and emotional. But all of them had a code of honor, a loyalty that transcended blood. The club was family, and Marina was a niece to everyone there. Roger's pain was everyone's pain. Big Mike, a man weighing almost 330 pounds with a proportionally large heart, suggested organizing a raffle, a charity event. Adam mentioned knowing a healer in the countryside who might be able to help. Each offered what they could: money, contacts, prayers. Roger thanked them all, but he knew they had already tried everything. That night, lying on the old couch in the clubhouse while Marina slept in the next room, Roger made a decision. The following Tuesday he would take a day off. There would be no doctor's appointments, no worries about money or treatments, just him and Marina, spending a normal day together, perhaps at the park, perhaps eating ice cream, just being father and daughter without the weight of the illness between them. It was a temporary surrender, but also an act of love. Sometimes, he thought before falling asleep, the cure we seek is not where we expect to find it. Sometimes it's in the small things, in simple moments. He didn't know how prophetic that reflection would turn out to be. Marina slept peacefully in the next room, her small hand under the pillow, unaware of her father's plans and the changes the next Tuesday would bring to both their lives. The silence that surrounded her was deep and complete, but soon, very soon, that silence would be broken in a way no one could have predicted. The answer Roger had sought in expensive clinics and sophisticated equipment would come from a completely unexpected place, from the hands of someone society had rendered invisible, someone who observed the world with eyes that truly saw. Tuesday dawned with a surprisingly clear sky over Portland. The Oregon summer usually meant mild, sometimes cloudy days, but that day the sun shone with an almost spring-like intensity. Roger woke early, brewed strong coffee, and made pancakes for Marina, although his culinary skills were limited. The girl came down the clubhouse stairs, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and smiled when she saw the special breakfast. They communicated through a combination of lip reading and sign language they had developed together over the years. Marina was incredibly intelligent, compensating for her lack of hearing with acute visual perception. She could interpret emotions just by observing people's body language, reading micro-expressions with the precision of an expert. Roger signaled that they would do something different that day. They would go to Rose City Park, one of Portland's largest and most beautiful green spaces. Marina clapped her hands with joy. She loved the park, especially feeding the geese and running on the grass. For her, the visual world was rich and fascinating. Every tree, every flower, every animal was a universe to be explored. They dressed in casual clothes. Roger exchanged his leather vest for a simple denim jacket, though he still wore heavy boots and a club t-shirt underneath. Marina put on a pink dress with white polka dots that Tony had given her for her birthday. They looked like a normal father and daughter going out for a common stroll, and that was exactly what Roger wanted. Normalcy, even if temporary. The drive to the park was peaceful. Roger drove slowly, savoring every moment. Marina was in the back seat, looking out the window and pointing at things that caught her attention. A dog, a red balloon, a man on a bicycle. Roger looked in the rear-view mirror and smiled, memorizing every expression of his daughter. Rose City Park was moderately busy for a Tuesday morning. There were elderly people walking, young people running, mothers with strollers, some street vendors selling popcorn and cotton candy. The lake shimmered under the sun, reflecting the deep blue of the sky. Geese swam placidly, occasionally coming out of the water to peck at the bread. Visitors through. Roger bought a bag of sweet popcorn and another of stale bread specifically to feed the geese. Marina ran ahead of him, her brown hair fluttering in the wind. She laughed silently, that soundless laugh that always broke Roger's heart, reminding him of the music missing from his daughter's life. They found a wooden bench under a leafy silk floss tree near the lake, but a little away from the busier areas. Roger sat down while Marina knelt on the grass to throw bits of bread to the geese that cautiously approached. It was a perfect, simple, and pure moment, without doctors or diagnoses or frustrations. Roger didn't immediately notice, but about 20 yards away, sitting on another bench partially hidden by bushes, was a boy observing everything. The boy was approximately 10 years old, with dark skin, messy curly hair, clothes visibly dirty and too old for his scrawny body. He was barefoot despite the morning chill, his feet covered in a layer of dirt that told stories of nights spent on the ground. The boy's name was Gabriel. He had no last name, or at least not one that mattered anymore. He had been living on the streets of Portland for almost 2 years. His story was a common tragedy in America's marginalized neighborhoods, full of losses a child should never have to bear. His mother, Connie, had passed away when he was 8, a victim of a fire in their shack in the flats. Gabriel was at school that day, a precarious public school that Connie insisted he attend. When he returned in the afternoon, he found only ashes and weeping neighbors. His father, Joachim, a man who had always struggled with drinking, couldn't bear the loss. For 6 months he tried to keep Gabriel with him, but each day he sank deeper into the bottle. Until one morning Gabriel woke up and found a scribbled note, a pathetic excuse about not being able to care for a child, about needing to leave. Gabriel never saw his father again. At 9 years old, he was completely alone in the world. He spent a brief time in a municipal shelter but ran away when one of the older teenagers started threatening him. The street seemed safer. At least on the street he could run, he could hide, he could be invisible. And Gabriel had become very good at being invisible. He learned to move in the shadows, to identify which people would ignore him and which would call the police or worse. He discovered the best places to sleep, the restaurant dumpsters that discarded still edible food, the public fountains where he could wash his face. He survived by asking for a few coins here and there, but mainly by observing. Life on the streets had sharpened Gabriel's senses in ways that children with roofs over their heads would never develop. He learned to read people, to anticipate dangers, to notice tiny details that could mean the difference between eating or starving, between safety or violence. His eyes, despite his young age, were old. They had seen too much. That morning, Gabriel was at Rose City Park because he had discovered that on Tuesdays, an elderly lady always brought extra bread and discreetly left it on a specific bench for those in need. She was a kind of anonymous angel, and Gabriel was one of the regular beneficiaries of this silent kindness. He had already taken his portion and was eating slowly, making it last, when he noticed the big man with the little girl. There was something about the man that immediately alerted Gabriel's survival instincts. His size, his posture, the way he moved, screamed potential danger. Gabriel knew how to identify the types of adults who posed a threat to street kids. But something else made him observe with renewed attention, the obvious tenderness between the man and the girl, the way he looked at her, how she smiled at him. Gabriel felt a pang of longing so sharp it almost hurt physically. He remembered how his mother used to comb his hair, how his father, on good days before the drink completely dominated him, would take him to play soccer in a small field. These were memories he tried not to revisit often, because they made the street even colder and lonelier. But then something else captured Gabriel's attention. The girl brought her hand to her right ear and touched it, scratched it, pulled it lightly. It was a gesture Gabriel recognized immediately. His mother had worked sporadically as a cleaning assistant at a health clinic, and sometimes Gabriel went with her when he didn't have school. He remembered seeing a nurse treating an elderly man who complained of not hearing well. The problem was an accumulation of compacted and hardened earwax, completely blocking the ear canal. The nurse had explained to Connie, who listened curiously, how that happened. Some people produced excess earwax or pushed the wax deeper when trying to clean with cotton swabs, and over time it became a solid plug. The treatment was simple: carefully remove the blockage. Gabriel remembered watching the procedure, fascinated by how the nurse used special tweezers and how the man immediately began to hear better. Now, watching the girl in the park, Gabriel saw the same repetitive gesture, the same discomfort. And when the sunlight struck at a specific angle, as the girl turned her head, Gabriel could see deep in the right ear canal something dark and compacted. His heart raced. Could it be? Was that it? He watched more carefully. The girl didn't react to the sounds around her. A dog barking nearby, children shouting in the distance. She communicated with her father through gestures and lip reading. Gabriel felt a certainty grow within him. He knew what was wrong, and more importantly, he knew how to fix it. But there was a gigantic problem. How to approach? The man was intimidating, protective, clearly the type who would react badly to a street boy approaching his daughter. Gabriel had been shooed away, pushed, and even kicked by suspicious adults. He knew how society saw him, as a nuisance, an annoyance, potentially dangerous. But at the same time, looking at that girl, at the innocent joy on her face as she fed the geese in a silent world, Gabriel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt he could make a difference. For the first time since his mother had passed away, he had a chance to truly help someone, to matter, to be more than just an invisible boy struggling to survive another day. Gabriel remained seated on his bench for more than 15 minutes, observing, pondering, wrestling with himself. The voice of reason, that inner voice that had kept him alive on the streets, told him to stay away, not to get involved, to remain invisible as he always did. But there was another voice, weaker but insistent. The voice that sounded like his mother, saying that when we can help someone, we should try. The boy looked at his own hands, small, dirty, with broken nails. Would they be capable of doing what he believed was possible? He had only observed the procedure once years ago. He had no tools, only his fingers. But the nurse had commented that in less severe cases, it was possible to remove it manually, with great care and delicacy. Marina ran back to the bench where Roger was sitting. She held a white feather she had found and showed it to her father with enthusiasm. Roger smiled, caressed his daughter's hair, and put the feather in his pocket as if it were a treasure. Gabriel watched the scene, and something inside him decided. He stood up slowly. His legs trembled, not from cold, but from anticipated fear of rejection, possibly aggression. He walked slowly across the grass, keeping his distance, but gradually approaching. Roger noticed the boy almost immediately. His instincts as a motorcycle club president, always alert for potential trouble, made his eyes narrow. When Gabriel was about 5 yards away, Roger stood up. He was an imposing figure, and from Gabriel's perspective, he seemed gigantic. Marina, sensing the tension in her father's body, also looked in the boy's direction. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity. Gabriel stopped. He raised his hands in a universal gesture of peace, showing he posed no threat. His mouth was dry. For a moment he considered running, but then he thought of the girl living in silence and found courage somewhere deep within his being. "Sir," Gabriel began, his voice hoarse from disuse, "I don't want money. I don't want anything, but I think I can help your daughter." Roger took a step forward, positioning himself between Gabriel and Marina. His face was a mask of suspicion. "Help how?" His voice was deep, threatening. "Who are you?" Gabriel swallowed hard. "My name is Gabriel. I live on the street. I saw that your daughter can't hear. She scratches her ear. I think I know what it is." Roger's jaw tightened. "You think you know? 15 doctors, kid. 15 specialists don't know what it is. And you, a street kid, think you know." The words were like slaps, but Gabriel expected it. "Sir, I saw my mum help someone with the same problem. It's wax. wax blocking her ear. I saw it from a distance, when the sun hit it. There's something dark in there. Roger laughed, but it was a humorless laugh, full of bitterness. Wax? You think 15 doctors didn't think of something as basic as wax? They've examined her ears hundreds of times. Did they examine, or did they just take a quick look? Gabriel didn't know where his boldness came from, perhaps from the desperation to make the man understand. Sometimes it's very deep, compacted. It looks like part of the ear. My mum said some doctors don't see it because they don't expect to see it. It's too simple. Roger took another step towards Gabriel, who automatically recoiled. Listen here, kid, I don't know what your game is, but I'm not letting you near my daughter. Now get out of here before I call park security. Gabriel felt tears of frustration burn his eyes. He wasn't used to crying. He had learned on the streets that tears were a dangerous luxury. But at that moment, faced with rejection, with the impossibility of helping, he felt completely powerless. Please, he whispered. I know you don't trust me. I understand. But your daughter, I can help her. I know I can. Just let me try. If I hurt her, you can do whatever you want to me. But please let me try. There was something in Gabriel's voice, a raw sincerity, a desperation that wasn't for money or personal gain. Roger hesitated. It was completely absurd, a street kid claiming to be able to do what the best doctors couldn't. But at the same time, Roger had already tried everything. What did he have to lose? Marina tugged at her father's jacket. She had lip-read the entire conversation. Her skill in that aspect was impressive. She signed something to her father. Let him try, Daddy. I'm not scared. Roger looked at his daughter, then at the boy, then back at his daughter. Marina had that determined look she had inherited from him, that look that said she had already made a decision and wouldn't change her mind. It was a Thompson trait, stubbornness disguised as conviction. All right, Roger said finally, his voice still harsh but with a trace of resignation. But I'm holding your wrist the whole time. If you hurt her, if she shows any pain, I'll break your arm. Understand? Gabriel nodded vigorously. Understood, sir. I'll be very careful, I promise. They approached the bench. Marina sat down, and Gabriel knelt beside her. His hands trembled visibly. Roger gripped Gabriel's right wrist with enough force to make it clear he wasn't joking, but not so strong as to impede movement. Marina looked at Gabriel and smiled, a confident smile that made the boy's heart ache. Gabriel took a deep breath. First, he carefully observed both of Marina's ears. The left one seemed normal. The right was where he had seen the blockage. With his free hand, he gesturally asked permission and delicately turned Marina's head to get better access. The sunlight was perfect at that angle. There it was, deep in the ear canal, almost imperceptible unless you knew what to look for, was a hardened mass of earwax and dirt, compacted over years. It was dark brown, almost black, and had formed in such a way that it looked like part of the natural anatomy. Gabriel immediately understood why the doctors had overlooked it, especially in quick examinations with inadequate lighting. Marina remained completely still. Roger watched Gabriel's every move like a hawk. Gabriel slowly brought his pinky finger to the entrance of the ear canal. His nails were short, naturally broken, which was actually good, less chance of scratching. He worked with a delicacy that contradicted his rough, street-hardened hands. The first touch was exploratory, feeling the texture, the depth, understanding how the blockage was positioned. Marina showed no discomfort. Encouraged, Gabriel began to work on the edges, trying to create space, carefully loosening the compacted mass from the walls of the ear canal. Roger barely breathed. 30 seconds passed like an eternity. Gabriel worked with total concentration, his tongue between his teeth, sweat forming on his forehead despite the chill. Then he got adequate leverage. With a precise but gentle movement, he extracted the plug. It was larger than seemed possible for that small space, a solid piece of hardened earwax, accumulated dirt and dead skin cells, compacted over years into an almost perfect cork. Gabriel held it between his thumb and forefinger, showing it to Roger with an expression of restrained triumph. And then something happened that no one was prepared to witness. Marina gasped. Her eyes widened enormously. Her head spun frantically from side to side. She began to tremble. not from fear, but from absolute sensory overload. The world invaded her consciousness like a flood, the sound of the wind in the tree leaves, the geese honking on the lake. Distant voices of other people in the park, a dog's bark, cars passing on the nearby avenue, the sound of her own accelerated breathing, all at once, unfiltered, unprepared. Marina began to cry. Tears streamed down her face as she brought her hands to her ears, not to block them but to touch them with reverence, with disbelief. She looked at her father and, for the first time in her conscious life, she heard when he spoke. "Marina," Roger whispered, his own voice cracking with emotion. "Can you hear me? Marina, my love, can you hear me?" And Marina, through the tears, through the shock, through the overload of completely new sensations, said something she had never truly said before, never hearing the words, never knowing if she was forming the sounds correctly. "Daddy," she said, and this time she heard her own voice, strange, wonderful, real. "Daddy, I hear you." Roger Thompson, a man who had faced bar brawls, potentially fatal motorcycle accidents, and the worst adversities life on the fringes of society could offer, collapsed. He fell to his knees on the park ground, hugging Marina so tightly she almost lost her balance. His broad shoulders shook with deep sobs that came from a place so profound he didn't even know it existed. 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of guilt, of feeling he was failing as a father, of spending every last penny in search of a solution. And the answer was there. So simple, so basic, in the dirty hands of a boy society had discarded as trash. Marina also cried, but her tears were of overwhelming joy mixed with absolute confusion. Every sound was new, every noise was a discovery. She clung to her father, then touched her own ears, then looked around trying to connect what she saw with what she now heard. A bird sang in a nearby tree, and Marina looked up in amazement, finally understanding what birds did besides just flying. Gabriel was frozen in place, still kneeling, observing the scene with an expression of silent shock. He had hoped it would work, but to see the actual result, to witness the moment that girl experienced sound for the first time, was something that transcended anything he could have imagined. Tears also streamed down his face, tears he didn't know he was shedding. After what seemed like hours but were only a few minutes, Roger released Marina and turned to Gabriel. The boy instinctively flinched, still conditioned to expect aggression. But what happened was something completely different. Roger pulled Gabriel into a crushing hug. The big man enveloped the scrawny boy as if he were the most precious thing in the world. "You saved my daughter," Roger repeated between sobs. "You saved her. How can I thank you? How?" Gabriel didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to hugs, much less from strangers, much less from intimidating men. But there was something comforting in that embrace, something he hadn't felt since his mother had passed away. Security, belonging, importance. When Roger finally released him, he held Gabriel by the shoulders and looked directly into his eyes. "What's your full name?" Gabriel hesitated. "Just Gabriel, sir. No last name that matters." "Do you have family? Anyone waiting for you somewhere?" Gabriel shook his head negatively. "No, sir, I don't have anyone." Something changed in Roger's face at that moment. A decision formed, impulsive perhaps, but absolutely certain. "Now you do," he said with a firmness that allowed no arguments. "You're coming with me. You're going to live with us. You gave my daughter back to me, and I'm not letting you go back to the street." Gabriel blinked, confused. "Sir, I don't need—" he began, but Roger interrupted him. "I'm not asking your opinion, kid. I'm telling you what's going to happen." And he did something that symbolized everything. He took off his Asphalt Eagles leather vest, that vest that was his identity, his emblem of authority and belonging, and placed it over Gabriel's thin shoulders. The vest was enormous for the boy, the sleeves hung far below his hands, the length reached almost to his knees. But there was something deeply significant in that gesture. In the world of motorcycle clubs, the vest was not just a piece of clothing, it was sacred, it was family, it was a blood oath. "This vest means you're part of the family now," Roger explained, his voice still rough with emotion. "You're my son, Marina is your sister, and the club, all of them are your family. Understand?" Gabriel didn't trust his own voice to answer, so he just nodded, new tears streaming down his dirty cheeks. Roger pulled him into another hug, and Marina joined them, creating a tangle of arms and tears and pure happiness. People in the park had noticed the scene. Some watched curiously, others looked away, uncomfortable with the public display of emotion. An elderly lady approached, asking if everything was all right, and Roger, laughing through tears, said everything was perfect, better than it had been in 6 years. The drive back to the Asphalt Eagles clubhouse was surreal. Gabriel sat in the back seat of the car next to Marina, still wearing the giant vest, unable to fully believe what was happening. Marina couldn't stop talking, testing her voice, asking questions about every sound she heard. "Daddy, what's that car noise and that whistle? Why do birds make different sounds?" Roger answered every question with infinite patience, his voice occasionally breaking with emotion. Gabriel watched everything in silence, still processing the abrupt change in his life. From invisible to son, from disposable to family, it was too much to absorb. When they arrived at the clubhouse, Tony was outside fixing a motorcycle. He looked up when he heard the car, and his face showed confusion upon seeing a skinny street boy wearing Roger's vest in the back seat. But before he could ask anything, Roger got out of the car and shouted something that made Tony drop the tool he was holding. "Marina can hear, Tony, she can hear!" Within minutes, all available club members gathered in the gravel yard in front of the clubhouse. Big Mike, Claude, Adam, and a dozen other bikers formed a confused circle. Roger told the story excitedly, pointing to Gabriel, showing the earwax plug still wrapped in a paper napkin, demonstrating how Marina now reacted to sounds. To prove it, Claude clapped his hands behind Marina without her looking. She spun around immediately with a radiant smile and said, "I heard. You?" The men's reaction was instant. Some shouted with joy, others hugged Marina. Big Mike cried openly without any shame. But when attention turned to Gabriel, who tried to make himself small and invisible out of habit, the atmosphere changed slightly. There was gratitude, certainly, but also instinctive suspicion. He was a street kid after all, dirty, clearly malnourished, possibly with fleas. Tony voiced what some were thinking. "Roger, what he did is great, but are you sure about this? Bringing a kid we don't know into the club?" Roger turned to Tony with an expression that brooked no argument. "This kid," he said, emphasizing each word, "did what 15 expensive doctors couldn't. He saw what no one else saw, and when he could have simply remained invisible, when he would gain nothing by risking approaching us, he came and helped. He gave my daughter back to me. So yes, Tony, I am absolutely sure." There was a moment of tense silence. Then Tony, who knew Roger well enough to know when there was no possible argument, simply nodded. "All right, brother. If you say he's family, then he's family." One by one, the other members did the same, some with more enthusiasm than others, but all eventually accepted. It was club law. The president's decision was final, especially in matters of family. Big Mike was the first to genuinely welcome Gabriel. He knelt to the boy's height and extended a huge hand. "Welcome to the Asphalt Eagles, kid. Anyone who makes our president cry tears of joy is welcome here." Gabriel shook his hand hesitantly, and Mike pulled him into a hug that almost crushed the boy. Then it was Adam, then Claude. One by one, each club member greeted Gabriel, officially receiving him into the brotherhood. Roger took Gabriel and Marina inside the clubhouse. The building was rustic, with exposed brick walls decorated with motorcycle club flags, old motorcycle plates, and framed photographs of trips and events. There was a bar in the corner, a worn pool table, old but comfortable sofas, and a persistent smell of motor oil, beer, and leather. "This will be your room," Roger said, opening a door in the upstairs hallway. It was small but clean, with a single bed, a closet, and a window overlooking the yard. Gabriel looked around as if he were in a palace. For someone who slept on sidewalks and in alleys, that modest room was unimaginable luxury. Marina was in the next room, and she immediately began showing her toys to Gabriel, talking incessantly, still marveling at her own ability to produce and hear sounds. Gabriel sat on the edge of Marina's bed, listening, occasionally smiling at this girl who was now his sister. Roger watched from the doorway, his heart so full it felt like it would burst. At that moment, he understood something fundamental. He had spent 6 years thinking he needed to save Marina. But in truth, Marina had been saved by someone society thought needed saving. And in the process of saving Marina, Gabriel had saved all of them, giving them purpose, perspective, and a lesson in humanity that none of them would ever forget. Gabriel's first days at the Asphalt Eagles clubhouse were a mix of adaptation and discovery. Roger had insisted the boy take a long bath that first night, and when Gabriel emerged from the shower, he found clean clothes waiting for him, jeans that needed to be adjusted with a belt, club t-shirts, and even new sneakers. Big Mike had made an emergency run to a clothing store, but the challenges were deeper than simply having a roof and clean clothes. Gabriel had developed survival instincts that wouldn't disappear overnight. He slept lightly, waking at any noise. He hid food under his pillow, unable to trust there would be breakfast the next day. He had difficulty making direct eye contact, especially with the more intimidating club members. Marina, however, was undergoing her own personal revolution. The world of sound was simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. During the first night, she woke up crying several times, startled by sounds she couldn't identify. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of floorboards when someone moved, the wind rattling a loose window. For her, who had lived in absolute silence, every sound was potentially threatening. It was Gabriel who ended up becoming her interpreter of the sound world. On the second night, when Marina woke up frightened by the noise of a motorcycle passing in the street, it was Gabriel who ran to her room even before Roger. He sat on the edge of her bed and, with a patience that contradicted his young age, began to explain. "It's just a motorcycle," he said softly. "Like your dad's motorcycles. Remember how he showed you the bikes today? That noise you heard was the engine. That's how they sound when they pass in the street." Marina held Gabriel's hand. "But how do I know if it's a good sound or a bad sound?" Gabriel thought for a moment. "You learn," he said. "Over time. I'll help you. When you hear a sound and don't know what it is, you call me, and I'll explain it to you. Okay?" That became their ritual. Every night, before Marina went to sleep, Gabriel would sit with her, and they would listen together to the sounds of the house and the street. He would identify each one. "That's the clock on the wall ticking, that's a dog barking far away, that's the wind, that's someone watching television." Gradually, Marina began to build a sound vocabulary, learning to distinguish threatening sounds from harmless ones. During the day, Roger took care of club obligations, but dedicated all possible free time to the two children. He enrolled Gabriel in the same public school Marina would attend, a nearby school that, while not perfect, was decent. But before that, he had to resolve bureaucratic issues. Gabriel had no documents, no official record of his existence. Roger discovered that solving this would be more complicated than he imagined. The system was clogged with cases, and obtaining a birth certificate for a child without records would take months, possibly years. But Roger was not a man to wait for bureaucracy. He had contacts, people who owed him favors, and he mobilized all of them. In 3 weeks, through paths not always official but definitely effective, Gabriel had documents. Gabriel Silver Thompson. Roger had insisted on adding his surname. School was a different challenge. Gabriel was years behind academically. His mother had managed to keep him studying until he was 8, but the 2 years on the streets had created enormous gaps. He read with difficulty. His math was basic. He knew nothing of science or history beyond what he had lived. But Gabriel had something many students didn't: a hunger to learn. He absorbed knowledge like a dry sponge. He stayed up late with borrowed books, asking endless questions of Roger and the other club members. Tony, who had completed a technical degree in mechanics, began helping him with math. Claude, who surprisingly had a background in history before embracing the biker life, taught him about the US and the world. Marina also began her own educational journey. For the first time, she could attend regular classes without needing a sign language interpreter. The school was understanding, recognizing that she would need special support as she learned to process auditory information. A speech therapist began visiting her twice a week, helping her refine her own voice, distinguish phonemes, and develop auditory skills that other children develop naturally in their early years of life. Gabriel accompanied Marina in many of these sessions. He had genuine interest, but more than that, he wanted to be present. For his sister, the bond between them was deep and unique. They had saved each other in different but equally important ways. Marina gave Gabriel purpose, a reason to be more than just a survivor. Gabriel gave Marina security, someone who understood both her old world of silence and her new world of sounds. 3 months after that transformative Tuesday in the park, life had established a routine. Gabriel and Marina went to school together, Gabriel instinctively protective, always walking on the outside of the sidewalk, always alert to potential dangers. At school, Marina quickly became popular, her unique story and cheerful personality attracting friendships. Gabriel was more reserved, but his intelligence and genuine effort earned the respect of his teachers. At night, the clubhouse was a place of camaraderie. The members had completely accepted Gabriel. Big Mike had become an additional father figure, teaching Gabriel about motorcycles, loyalty, and the club's code of honor. Adam sometimes took him to help with his carpentry work, teaching him a useful trade. Each member contributed in some way to the boy's education, but it was on a cold August night, almost 5 months after that day in the park, that the conversation happened that would again change the trajectory of their lives. Roger had called a meeting of all the members. It was a formal affair, with everyone seated around the large wooden table in the main room of the clubhouse. "Brothers," Roger began, his voice echoing in the attentive silence, "you all know what happened with Marina. You know how Gabriel came to us. I've spent the last few months thinking a lot about this, about how blind we've been, about how many children like Gabriel are on the streets we pass every day without truly seeing." He paused, looking around, the table at each face. Gabriel was sitting next to Marina in the corner of the room, not entirely part of the meeting but present as family. "We have space here," Roger continued. "We have resources. We're not rich, but we have more than we need. And I propose we do something with it. I want the Asphalt Eagles to become a refuge for children like Gabriel. Children the system has failed. Invisible children." There was a murmur around the table. Tony was the first to speak. "Roger, it's a noble idea, but this is huge. Do we have the structure for that? And legally there are issues." "I know," Roger replied. "It won't be easy. But when has the Asphalt Eagles ever chosen the easy path? We can do this right. We can register as a non-profit organization. We can create partnerships with the foster care system. We can offer temporary homes, maybe even permanent ones. We can give these children what we gave Gabriel, a family, a chance." Mike cleared his throat, his voice emotional. "I support this completely. This kid," he pointed to Gabriel, "changed our lives, showed us that we can be more than just a motorcycle club. We can really make a difference." One by one, the members expressed their opinions. There were practical concerns, of course, questions about money, space, legal responsibilities. But there was also a growing enthusiasm. Many of these men came from difficult backgrounds. They understood what it was like to feel discarded by society. The idea of paying it forward, of being the family they themselves had once needed, resonated deeply. The vote was unanimous. The Asphalt Eagles would expand its mission. They would start small, perhaps 1 or 2 additional children initially, learning as they went. Roger had already contacted lawyers and social workers, preparing the groundwork. Gabriel had listened to everything in silence. When the meeting ended and the men began to disperse, he approached Roger. "Dad," he said, and the natural use of that word made Roger smile. "Is this because of me?" Roger knelt to Gabriel's height. "This is because of you," he corrected. "You taught us to see. You taught us that family isn't always about blood. It's about who is willing to be present, who is willing to help, who sees value where others see only a problem. You gave us a purpose greater than just riding our motorcycles on Sundays." Gabriel hugged Roger, and Marina joined them. There, at a motorcycle club clubhouse in Portland, 3 people who had found each other in an improbable way formed the core of what would become something much bigger than any of them could have imagined that Tuesday morning in Rose City Park. 3 years had passed since that transformative day in the park. Gabriel was now 13, had grown several inches, and although still lean, no longer had the malnourished appearance of the street child he once was. His eyes retained the depth of someone who had seen too much for his age, but now there was also a sparkle of hope and purpose. Marina, at 11, was a vibrant and confident girl. Her adaptation to the world of sound was complete. She not only heard perfectly, but had developed a deep passion for music. Roger had bought a used piano 2 years ago, and Marina practiced religiously every afternoon. Her teacher said she had natural talent, a sensitivity for melodies that was rare. Marina often said that perhaps it was because she remembered silence, so she appreciated every note in a way others couldn't. The biggest transformation, however, had happened with the Asphalt Eagles. The foster project Roger had proposed that night 3 years ago had become a reality and then grown beyond their initial expectations. The clubhouse had been expanded, with an annex built in the back containing 6 additional bedrooms. They had obtained non-profit registration and official partnership with the municipal foster care system. At that moment, there were 8 children living at the clubhouse besides Gabriel and Marina. Each brought their own story of trauma and abandonment. There was Lucas, 7, who had run away from an abusive foster home. There were twins Beatrice and Bianca, 9 orphans whose relatives didn't want them. There was Raphael, 12, who had been found living in a bus terminal. There was Julia, 6, rescued from a severe neglect situation. There were Kyle and Peter, brothers aged 8 and 10, who refused to be separated by the system. There was Leona, 13, who had run away from home after years of domestic violence. Each child had been welcomed in the same way as Gabriel, with the open arms of those rough but big-hearted bikers. The club had developed a system. Each member became a mentor to at least one child, teaching them trades, values, giving them the individual attention the overloaded system couldn't provide. Gabriel had become a central figure in this system. He understood better than anyone what those children were going through, the fear, the distrust, the difficulty of believing they were finally safe. He was often the first to welcome newcomers, sitting with them, telling his own story, showing them that it was possible not just to survive, but to thrive. The local school had become a partner in the project. All the teachers knew the Asphalt Eagles children and made extra efforts to support them. Gabriel was excelling academically, particularly in science. His biology teacher had commented that Gabriel had the mind of a researcher, always asking insightful questions, always wanting to understand the why of things. But the most significant revelation would happen on a cold November Saturday afternoon when Gabriel would turn 14. Roger had organized a party at the clubhouse with all the children, all the club members, and several people from the community who had become involved with the project over the years. The yard was decorated with colorful flags. There were barbecues smoking with meat, tables laden with salads and desserts. Children ran among the parked motorcycles, laughing, playing. Club members supervised, some helping in the kitchen, others organizing games. It was a scene of domestic normalcy that contrasted completely with the stereotypical image of motorcycle clubs. Marina had prepared a special surprise. She had composed a song for Gabriel, her first original composition. In the middle of the party, she asked for silence and sat at the piano they had brought into the yard for the occasion. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment. Then she began to play. The melody was beautiful and melancholic, with notes that rose and fell like waves. Then Marina began to sing, her voice clear and in tune, telling a story about a brave boy who saw the invisible, about a miracle performed by small hands, about family that chooses itself. There wasn't a dry eye among the adults present. When Marina finished, there was a moment of reverent silence before everyone erupted in applause. Gabriel was crying openly, unashamed. Marina got off the piano bench and hugged her brother. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me sounds. Thank you for giving me music." Roger watched from the edge of the celebration, leaning against his Harley with Tony beside him. The two friends stood in silence for a long moment, just observing the scene. Happy children, people laughing, an improvised but genuine family. "You remember," Tony said eventually, "when you got here 3 years ago after that day in the park, you were convinced you had saved that kid from the street." Roger chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I was so wrong," he said. "I didn't save him. He saved us. All of us." Tony nodded. "Before Gabriel, we were just a bunch of aging bikers, riding on Sundays, drinking beer, living in the past. Now look at what we are. Look at what we're doing. These kids, they have a future because of us, but we have purpose because of them." "It's funny," Roger reflected, "how I spent 6 years looking for a cure for Marina in the wrong places. I spent everything I had on expensive doctors and tests, and the answer was there, in the hands of a boy society had discarded. An invisible boy. It makes you think about how many other answers, how many other miracles are out there, hidden in people we don't see." Tony watched Gabriel being lifted onto Big Mike's shoulders, the boy laughing as other children sang, "Happy birthday." "He's special, that kid. Always was. He just needed someone to see it." "Everyone is special," Roger corrected gently. "Every one of these children, Gabriel, Marina, Lucas, the twins, all of them. They just need someone to see, to care, to be present. That's all any child needs in the end." The party continued until dusk. When the children finally started to get tired, they were escorted to their rooms. Roger made sure to go from room to room, wishing each one good night, checking if they were comfortable, if they needed anything. It was a ritual he performed every night, no matter how tired he was. When he reached Gabriel's room, he found the boy sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window at the stars. "Dad," Gabriel said when Roger entered, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, my son, always." Gabriel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Do you regret it? Bringing me home that day? All this change, all this responsibility, do you regret it?" Roger sat next to Gabriel, putting his arm around the boy's shoulders. "Gabriel," he said, his voice full of emotion, "that was the best day of my life. Better even than the day Marina was born, because that day I got both my daughter back and a son I didn't even know I was waiting for. You didn't just change Marina's life, you changed mine. You changed everyone's here." He paused, ensuring Gabriel was looking at him. "I spent years feeling powerless, feeling like I was failing as a father. But you showed me that real strength isn't in having money or connections, or muscles. It's in caring, in paying attention, in having the courage to act when you see someone needing help. You were 10 years old and already knew that. You taught me something I should have learned a long time ago." Gabriel snuggled against Roger, and they stayed like that for a long moment. "I miss my mom," Gabriel said softly. "Sometimes. But I know she'd be happy knowing where I am now, knowing I have a family again." "Your mom is proud of you," Roger said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows her son is making a difference in the world. And you are, Gabriel, more than you imagine." The next morning, Sunday, there was a special ceremony in the clubhouse yard. Roger had ordered an official vest for Gabriel, no longer his borrowed one, but his own, properly sized, with embroidered insignias. On the front, over the heart, was written Asphalt Eagles. On the back, in large letters, was the name Gabriel, and below it a phrase, "The one who sees the invisible." When Roger placed the vest on Gabriel's shoulders in front of all the assembled members and all the fostered children, it was a moment of official recognition. Gabriel was no longer just a rescued child. He was a full member, a brother, family in the deepest sense of the word. The other children applauded, some asking when they would receive their own vests. Roger smiled and promised that when each of them was ready, when they demonstrated the club's values, loyalty, courage, compassion, they too would receive their vests. Marina was particularly emotional. She hugged Gabriel tightly and whispered, "You'll always be my hero. Always." In the months that followed, the story of the Asphalt Eagles and their foster project began to attract regional attention. A local newspaper published a report. A television station did a feature. Other motorcycle clubs began to reach out, interested in replicating the model in their own cities. Roger and Gabriel were invited to speak at social assistance conferences about alternative foster care models. Gabriel, who at 14 already demonstrated impressive public speaking skills, told his story unashamedly, explaining how a simple act of kindness had created a wave of change. Marina continued to develop her musical talent. At 15, she would give her first public recital, playing her own compositions. Gabriel would be in the front row, applauding louder than anyone, tears of pride streaming down his face as he listened to that music that only existed because he had had the courage to cross the distance between invisibility and action. But despite all the external recognition, despite the reports and awards that began to arrive, the most significant moment for Roger happened on a quiet evening, 3.5 years after that day in the park. He was sitting alone in the yard, enjoying the rare silence, when Gabriel joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just watching the stars. Then Gabriel said something. That summarized everything perfectly. "Dad, remember when you found me that day and thought you were saving a street kid?" Roger nodded. "I remember. Do you realize now that no one saved anyone? We saved each other. You gave me a family, but I gave you purpose. Marina gave me a sister, but I gave her sounds. The club gave me a home, but I gave the club a mission. That's how it works, right? True salvation is never one way." Roger looked at the boy, already almost a young adult, and marveled at his wisdom. "You're absolutely right," he said. "And that's why you're my son, not because I rescued you, but because we chose to be family to each other." Gabriel smiled, that smile that had started shy and broken 3 years ago and was now confident and genuine. "Chosen family is the best family," he said. And Roger, looking around at the clubhouse that had transformed into a true home for so many, thought of all the children sleeping in the rooms, each with their own story of pain, but now with a future of possibilities. He thought of Marina and her music, of Gabriel and his precocious wisdom, of all the club members who had found a greater purpose than just riding roads. The miracle hadn't just been Marina's hearing recovery that day in the park. The true miracle was what happened afterward, the transformation from invisibility to visibility, from abandonment to belonging, from survival to a full life. It was proof that when we open our eyes to see those society ignores, when we extend our hands to those who have been discarded, we ourselves are transformed in the process. Roger Thompson, president of the Asphalt Eagles, a biker hardened by life, had begun his journey, thinking he needed to save his daughter. In the end, he discovered that true salvation came from an invisible boy who just needed to be seen. And by seeing him, by choosing him as family, Roger and everyone in the club found something they didn't know they were looking for, a greater meaning, a transcendent purpose, a family that transcended all conventional definitions. And it had all begun because a 10-year-old boy had the courage to cross the distance between invisibility and action, between fear and compassion, between being alone and creating family. That earwax plug removed from an ear had opened not only Marina's ear canals, but the eyes of all of them to a world of possibilities that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Roger, Marina, and Gabriel has touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours in telling it. This narrative reminds us that true miracles often happen at the hands of those society chooses not to see, and that family is much more about who we choose to love than about blood ties. To follow this exciting journey and discover other equally captivating stories about courage, redemption, and the transformative power of kindness. If this story moved you, if Gabriel, Marina, and the Asphalt Eagles bikers won a place in your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human life, stories that remind us of the best we can be. Tell us in the comments which part of this story moved you the most, if you have ever experienced being seen when you felt invisible, or if you know of any inspiring project similar to the Asphalt Eagles. Your interaction helps us continue to bring quality content. Don't miss our next content, where we will continue to explore the stories that make us reflect, cry, and believe in human kindness. We await you here in the comments and see you in the next story.